Lee Jae-heon was already heading toward Jung Eun-gyo's house when Kim Byung-jun called to tell him that the money they had collected from the festival would be enough to cover the empty trip. They could even choose between the beach and the valley. But Jae-heon wasn't interested. All he could think about was why Eun-gyo hadn't called him or replied to his texts. Instead, he kept getting a bunch of useless calls. Nervously drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, he wondered if she had suddenly changed her mind about their date. After all, she was the one who suggested it. Maybe he should have been bolder and just invited her to his place. Ever since he had heard those casually spoken words about going on a date from Jung Eun-gyo, he felt like he was on a roller coaster, soaring with joy one moment and plunging into anxiety the next. He even laughed at himself, thinking how ridiculous he must look. He didn't want to appear like an excited little boy in front of her. In front of her, he tried to look confident, so he casually told her he'd swing by home to change and then come pick her up. Pressing the gas pedal to the floor, he sped up. Suddenly, he got angry, thinking, could that jerk Lee Do-hyun have shown up again and ruined everything? But then he saw Jung Eun-gyo standing by the roadside and was surprised. She looked beautiful and gentle, yet strangely uneasy. The sight of her made Jae-hyun's breath catch, his cheeks flush, and for a moment his mind went completely blank. Flustered, he got out of the car immediately and asked what had happened. Why hadn't she answered his calls? Smiling, the girl waved her phone and explained she had dropped it. It got wet, and now it wouldn't turn on. That's why she came outside to meet him so he wouldn't worry. Smiling sweetly, she apologized, saying she didn't want to make him anxious. Jae-hyun looked closely at her and sensed something wasn't right. Then he suggested they wait a bit to see if her phone would work again, or she could use his in the meantime. But Eun-gyo assured him she could easily go without a phone for a day. Jae-hyun agreed, but he noticed faint traces that she had recently been crying. Still, he chose not to upset her with unnecessary questions. Instead, he casually wrapped his arm around her waist, pulled her closer, and smiled, asking where she'd like to go. His hand rested so naturally on her hip that Eun-gyo felt no discomfort. Looking up at the sky, she remarked that it might rain soon. By now, Jae-hyun already knew her well enough to realize she wouldn't want to go anywhere in such weather. But still, he asked if there was a place she'd like to visit for their date. But she hesitated, then answered that she didn't know. She just wanted to be with him. This made Jae-hyun certain something had definitely happened. Today she was acting differently than usual, though still looking stunning. He took her hand and intertwined their fingers. He desperately wanted to know what was troubling her, but instead he raised their joined hands to his lips and kissed her hand, smiling softly and never taking his eyes off her. At last, Eun-gyo's face lit up with a faint, genuine smile. Her cheeks flushed slightly as she admitted she honestly hadn't planned anything. Jae-hyun admired her and felt happy that he could ease her worries just by being silently at her side. Then suddenly, his eyes landed on a cafe sign and an idea came to him. He asked why they shouldn't start with a cup of coffee. Since the cafe was closed, they would have the whole place to themselves. Jung Eun-gyo watched in surprise at how professionally he handled the coffee-making process and asked where he had learned it. Standing in the kitchen with his sleeves rolled up, Jae-hyun brewed coffee for the two of them with expert ease. Without answering, he suddenly leaned down and left a light yet lingering kiss on her lips. Then he returned to the coffee and explained that it was just something that came naturally to him. Eun-gyo admitted he was better at it than her. With a grin, he asked if she should hire him as her barista. She went to fetch the cups and said she'd seriously consider it. Looking at the cups, she thought it might be good to warm them first, and that a hot cup of coffee would surely lift her spirits. Glancing at him, she thought that maybe it was because of how he was dressed, but Jae-hyun didn't look like a 20-something college student at all. The way he looked and carried himself gave the impression of a successful businessman. Reaching for a cup, Eun-gyo suddenly thought of how Lee Do-hyun used to make her coffee on rainy days too. For some reason, she remembered how her ex would hand her a warm, light coffee, the kind she usually preferred. That memory made her freeze and feel sad. Why, despite everything happening, did she still keep remembering him? Suddenly, she heard a soft whisper by her ear. Light, right? Lee Jae-heon had come up behind her, reaching for the cups while she stood frozen, lost in thought. He said he would make her a warm coffee and stepped away. Meanwhile, Eun-gyo kept wondering why the memories she wanted to forget kept resurfacing so unexpectedly. Jae-hyun was pouring the coffee when he suddenly heard her quiet voice. She said she had changed her mind and didn't want coffee anymore. He turned in surprise, confused. Had he done or said something wrong? But Eun-gyo grabbed his shirt collar, pulled him close, and said she wanted something else. Jae-heon admitted he was very surprised and intrigued in that moment. Running his finger along her lower lip, he asked what had suddenly made her lose interest in the coffee she had been waiting for. Then he leaned in and kissed her gently, giving her the chance to decide for herself what she wanted. She clutched his shirt collar even tighter, pulling him closer. Breaking off the kiss, Unkyo suddenly suggested they go to the supply room. For some reason, she felt surrounded by the scent of rain. Though it hadn't started yet, she couldn't understand where it came from. Once inside the supply room, the sound of rain finally began outside. To the music of the falling rain, Jae-heon kissed her slowly as if trying to calm her. Pulling back slightly, he leaned to her ear and whispered, asking what had gotten her so worked up today. The girl tucked her hair behind her ear, looking very shy. The sight of her flushed cheeks, hazy eyes, and kiss-swollen lips drove Jae-heon crazy. What had gotten into her today? Blushing, Unkyo admitted that he knew how much she loved his voice. Ever since that first time in the recording studio, she had often thought about it. Leaving a light bite on her skin, Jae-heon replied that he'd love to find out just how much she liked his voice. Unkyo looked into his eyes and realized she had fallen for him completely and irreversibly. She loved how she felt around him and missed it whenever he wasn't there. Jae-heon grinned smugly, telling her she belonged only to him. He understood that she was torn apart by worries she couldn't get rid of or cope with, and that's why she was acting so strangely today. So he lifted her up and settled her on his lap. Jae-heon knew there was only one reason Unkyo might behave this way. Holding both her hands behind her back with one of his, he pulled her close. Then, pressing her against himself, he whispered in her ear that he would do anything she asked. She melted into him like warm water. Young Unkyo's thoughts and feelings truly were in chaos. But at last, the unwanted face of Lee Jae-heon that had surfaced so many times today finally disappeared. All she could see before her was Lee Jae-heon. Tears quietly rolled down her cheeks, and she finally realized why the scent of rain had been haunting her all day. The scent that had always been her weakness. It was coming from Jae-heon. Meanwhile, outside, a heavy downpour had begun. Jae-heon held the girl tightly, feeling the rhythm of her heart gradually slowing down. Unkyo rested her head on his shoulder, breathing with relief, savoring his closeness. But then suddenly he asked if she was feeling better now, and it startled her. How did he know? Gently kissing her on the cheek, he asked if she really thought he wouldn't notice her mood and pressed, what had upset her so much? After all, she clearly wasn't sick. While Unkyo tried to gather her thoughts and make sense of what she was even doing, Jae-heon asked if she was hungry. He thought she might crave something tasty. Unkyo remained silent, only running her hand through his silky hair, gazing at his face. Jae-heon turned his head slightly, pressing his cheek into her palm. Feeling happy, yet she couldn't shake the thought that here, in the very place where her depression was once born, she was now using him to overwrite those memories. Then suddenly he asked why they didn't spend her entire vacation together. But Unkyo replied that she was planning to visit her parents in Mungyeong since she hadn't seen them in a long time. Jae-heon said she could take him with her and introduce him to them, but with a sigh she answered that she couldn't do that just yet. While her phone rang on the counter, forgotten in the cafe, Unkyo promised that she would tell Jae-heon when she returned, and then they could spend the last days of her vacation together. A little later, Unkyo was scrolling through her newsfeed in surprise. She hadn't even expected her phone to work again. To her amazement, she discovered that the coffee Jae-heon had made was truly delicious, so he hadn't lied about his skills at all. While she waited for him inside the cafe, the guy stepped outside to answer a phone call. She couldn't believe that simply drinking something tasty had so quickly and easily lifted her mood. Usually, she stayed gloomy for a long time after anxious. Remembering Jae-heon's expression, she wondered if she had really changed that much, or if it was all thanks to him. Blushing, recalling how he helped her release her tension, the girl sucked more eagerly on the straw of her coffee. How lucky it was that there were no surveillance cameras in the supply room. She wouldn't have survived if Kim Hae-da had found out about them. And yet, she still felt guilty for using Lee Jae-heon to shake off her anxiety. The clearer their relationship, the better. Just because they were honest about their desires didn't mean they were actually dating. She didn't want to be reckless or cross the line. Their relationship could end at any moment, and if it did, she wanted it to happen on her terms. For some reason, she thought that's exactly how it would be. In truth, she wasn't planning to stay long in Mungyeong. But if she remained here with Jae-heon, she might make a mistake. Right now, she wanted to dedicate as much time as possible to herself, to figure herself out. The girl's phone rang. It was her friend, Lee Seo-woo. She asked if she had gotten the wedding invitation from their former classmate, Jae-hee. Unkyo said she had, but wasn't sure if she wanted to go since they hadn't really been that close. Seo-woo insisted, saying the ceremony would be held at the Continental Philharmonic and the food there was amazing. Just then, Lee Jae-heon came back to the cafe, and Unkyo told her friend they'd meet the day after tomorrow at the hotel entrance. She had a few things to take care of, so she said goodbye. Smiling warmly, the guy asked if she had thought about what she wanted to do. She asked if maybe they should get something to eat. Jae-heon smiled and said they could. But what did she want to do afterward? Jung Eun-gyo let out a heavy sigh and admitted she hadn't prepared at all. It had been so long since she'd gone on a date, she'd even forgotten what people usually do on them. Jae-heon chuckled and asked if they should just do what normal people do. "And what do people usually do on dates?" she asked. He answered that usually couples eat together, go to an exhibit or see a movie, and then find something memorable to finish off the day. Nervously sipping her drink, she asked if that was really what people usually did on dates. Jae-heon leaned closer, placing his hands on the table on either side of her, boxing her in. A sly smile played on his lips as he said they had a good chance of doing all that, but hadn't they already done everything in reverse? He added that they definitely needed to eat since she was probably hungry, and then they'd figure out the rest. She froze, staring at his radiant smile. When he talked to her and made plans, it felt like he was glowing with happiness, and she wanted so badly to smile back and tell him how happy she was too. But she felt too embarrassed. Later that evening, Lee Jae-heon arrived at his parents' home. His mother greeted him at the door with joy, saying she hadn't seen her beloved son in so long. She scolded him for visiting so rarely. He told her he was here now, so she shouldn't nag. Then he asked what the occasion was for hosting a dinner party. His mother said she had missed her boys so much that his stepfather invited them both. And besides, he had something to share. As they walked down the hallway, the study doors began to open. His mother said that his stepfather and brother should be finishing their talk and coming out any second. Finally, Jae-heon saw his stepfather in the doorway and greeted him, but his body tensed when he realized who else was there. His stepfather gave him a kind smile and said it had been a long time. Behind him stood Lee Do-hyun. Do-hyun looked at his brother with a slight smile and said he was late, as usual. Lee Jae-heon bared his teeth in a half smile and said nothing. All he thought was, what was this bastard planning? A little later, Jae-heon spotted his mother's pet and was surprised at how much it had grown and filled out. It was a fluffy white puppy, wagging its tail happily as it greeted him. Jae-heon called out, "Jangsu," and joked that the dog could use a little dieting. His mother was offended, correcting him that the puppy's name was Jang-gun. "When will you finally remember that? And stop being so harsh with my baby?" Jae-heon thought about how his mother had spoiled that dog for years like it was a child. She always needed someone to pour her love and care into, someone who could give her affection back. She hadn't been able to endure his father's stricter, colder nature and lack of attention. They were total opposites. So she remarried a more romantic man, Jae-heon's stepfather. Jae-heon had hoped that would mean less trouble for him, but he was wrong. While his mother and stepfather discussed how they should probably walk the dog more often, Lee Do-hyun played the role of the model son, saying he was glad to see his parents getting along so well. The brothers' eyes met in a silent clash. Jae-heon was happy for his mother, but hadn't expected his stepfather to drag along this piece of trash. For now, the evening went on as usual. At the table, casual conversation flowed. His father asked why it had been so hard to see Do-hyun since his return, and Do-hyun answered that he had just been busy with the move. Jae-heon watched silently, smirking inwardly. When Do-hyun had been cast out, everyone acted as if they'd never see him again. And now, they'd changed their tune, fawning over him and even inviting him to a family dinner. With a fake smile, Do-hyun told their father that it seemed just as hard to see Jae-heon, even though he'd lived in the same country this whole time. He said he was glad the whole family could finally sit at one table together. Their mother clapped her hands happily, saying the house hadn't been this lively in ages. It finally felt alive again. She suggested they all take a trip together as a real family since it had been so long. Jae-heon immediately told them to go without him. He needed to work on his dissertation. Do-hyun also said he couldn't go, since he had just rented a house and would be moving next week. The news shocked their parents. Why was he suddenly renting a whole house? Smiling, Lee Do-hyun explained that he was moving in with his girlfriend, Jung Eun-gyo. She was the one who had believed in him and waited all this time, despite the situation with Jo Yeon-ju. And moving in together would be their first step toward a shared future. Do-hyun smiled and added that Jae-heon also knew Jung Eun-gyo. Jae-heon kept a calm expression, though anger boiled inside him. He simply asked if he was talking about that sunbae. Do-hyun went on to explain to their parents that the studio Jae-heon rented was actually in Jung Eun-gyo's basement apartment. Wasn't that fate? Clearly, he and Eun-gyo were meant to be. He even asked his brother to look after her until their house was ready. With another smile, Do-hyun added that in their last phone call, she had cried a lot, but soon he'd take her with him, and everything would be fine. Jae-hyun kept his face composed, only pressing his lips tighter together. He suspected something was seriously wrong with his brother's head. What Do-hyun was doing now was pure provocation. In essence, Do-hyun was declaring that he didn't care what had happened between Jae-heon and Eun-gyo. He wasn't backing down. Meanwhile, their father was happy for his son and suggested Do-hyun bring this girl to dinner sometime soon. If it weren't for that shameless Jo Yeon-ju, none of this would have happened. How could she have so brazenly passed off someone else's child as Lee Jae-heon's? Their father regretted not believing Jae-heon at the time and throwing him out, but now he wouldn't let it go. Jae-heon calmly replied that it was fine. His father had had every right to be angry. Thank God for his mother, who had stood up for him. If not for her, they might have completely broken ties. He intended to deal with Jo Yeon-ju himself. After all, it was Jae-heon who had introduced her to them in the first place, so of course he carried a heavy sense of guilt. That's why they should stop talking about it. His mother looked at him in surprise and asked if he had really introduced his brother to that girl. Jae-heon wasn't surprised that his brother was doing what he always did, trying to taint his name and provoke him. He just smiled, apologized, and added that he hadn't expected Do-hyun to get so hung up on Jo Yeon-ju, considering he was already dating Jung Eun-gyo at the time. Who would have thought a guy with a girlfriend would be chasing after another girl? Do-hyun ground his teeth in anger and hissed, "What the hell are you talking about?" Their father sensed the tension between his sons and loudly ordered them to stop. If they wanted to fight, they could take it outside. Jae-heon stood up from the table, thanked his parents for the invitation, and said it was time for him to leave. He was already halfway to the door when Do-hyun called after him, asking him to wait. Smiling, Do-hyun asked if Jae-heon had feelings for Eun-gyo. If so, he said he'd turn a blind eye to whatever had happened between them, but Jae-heon needed to get his head straight. Jae-heon turned back to his brother and asked why on earth he should pretend nothing had happened. Who gave Do-hyun the right to make decisions like that? His brother spread his arms and said he just didn't want Jae-heon to suffer. Jae-heon replied that he couldn't believe Do-hyun was acting this way after what he'd done to Sunbae. Do-hyun answered that Jae-heon didn't understand. Their love with Eun-gyo wasn't something that could just disappear. Their relationship wasn't over. He just hadn't realized Jo Yeon-ju would drag him so far away. He remembered how the pregnant girl constantly threw fits because of her condition and demanded that he marry her. Being with Jo Yeon-ju, Do-hyun eventually realized that if it had been Eun-gyo in her place, she would have put his needs above her own, stayed quiet, and never pressured him like that. But unfortunately, he realized it too late. What he had mistaken for boredom and routine with Eun-gyo had actually been love. And the one who had fallen first, and deeper, was Jung Eun-gyo. Even after he left, her feelings stayed strong. He had been the one who taught her how to love, so he was certain they still had a future together. Do-hyun patted his brother's shoulder with a smile, saying that now the truth was out, he would just explain everything to Eun-gyo, and asked Jae-heon to help him with that. Jae-heon brushed off his brother's hand and calmly replied that Do-hyun had been through too much lately, and his delusions had gotten out of control. He needed to seriously consider treatment because walking around saying things like this was dangerous. Then he patted Do-hyun's shoulder in return, smirked, and added that he shouldn't worry about Eun-gyo crying. He had comforted her plenty. Hearing this, Do-hyun lost it and shouted that Jae-heon was a bastard. How dare he? Jae-heon smiled and asked if Do-hyun wasn't the one who had begged him to look after Eun-gyo. So there was nothing to worry about. He'd take care of her. His brother just needed to stay out of it and, most importantly, get a medical checkup. Do-hyun was left standing there, fists clenched in rage, staring at his brother's back as he walked away. Sitting in his car, Lee Jae-heon got a call from his mother asking what had happened between him and his brother. He leaned his head back and said he was tired. He'd listened to all of Do-hyun's nonsense and just wanted to rest now. But his mother wouldn't let it go and asked if he really was involved with his brother's girlfriend. She wanted him to come back so they could all talk it out, but Jae-heon said he was hanging up. The way she still tried to control him was just exhausting. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, he thought about how she didn't even realize she hadn't been much of a mother to her child, and his father hadn't been much better after the divorce. Still, Jae-heon had chosen to live with her since she was less domineering. And besides, he hadn't been the perfect son either. In the next moment, he desperately wanted to hear Jung Eun-gyo's voice and hit the call button. But to his surprise, her phone was temporarily unavailable. Then he remembered that during their walk, she had warned him that even though her phone was working again, the signal might still cut out at any time. That's when Jae-heon had suggested getting her a new one. But Eun-gyo smiled and said it wasn't necessary. Besides, she had a pile of work waiting at home and a few people whose calls she'd rather avoid. He could still see the traces of tears on her face, but chose not to bring it up. He only asked if anyone had been bothering her. She grew thoughtful and said everything was fine, that it was probably better this way. But Jae-heon knew she had been crying because of Do-hyun. So now he clenched his phone angrily. Who the hell did that bastard think he was, making Eun-gyo cry? Meanwhile, Jung Eun-gyo was on the phone with a publishing representative. They were discussing the release of her new book in the fall. The woman from the publisher loved the main male character, so dangerous and magnetic. She asked if Jung Eun-gyo had based him on a real person, and the author had to admit that she had. Without even realizing it, she had been inspired by Lee Jae-heon. But wasn't her book supposed to be a thriller? Eun-gyo confirmed it was. A soft psychological thriller, and that the synopsis still held together. The woman encouraged her and wished her all the best. Eun-gyo was glad for the kind words. Glancing at the clock, Eun-gyo realized it was already past 10 p.m. She hadn't chatted so passionately in ages. Usually she was used to listening more than talking, but tonight she felt both light and energized, unable to stop herself from speaking. For the first time in a long while, she felt a dizzying excitement about her own work. She had almost forgotten what that felt like. Just then, her phone rang. It was Lee Jae-heon. Smiling, she picked up, happy to hear from him. He told her he had been worried since he couldn't reach her for so long. Eun-gyo explained she had been stuck on a long work call and was just relaxing now. She asked what he was up to. He said he was just sitting in his car, thinking about her. He admitted he was worried something might have happened since she hadn't been answering. That answer genuinely surprised her. His voice, tinged with a playful smile, made her realize she was completely obsessed with the sound of it. Maybe it was a kind of fetish. Out of the blue, she asked if he had been thinking dirty thoughts. In his low voice, he asked how she had guessed. Then he asked if she thought he was crazy. She laughed brightly and said, "Of course you are." Jae-heon asked, "And whose fault is that?" Suddenly, he asked if he could come over right now, but she replied she still had a lot of work, and after that she had to go to her friend's pre-wedding party, so they could meet in a couple of days. Still, he pressed, asking if he couldn't see her even for just a few minutes. Eun-gyo teased him, saying he was acting like a child. Smiling, she playfully said she wished she could see his face right now. Jae-heon replied that thanks to her, he wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. She could hear the faint frustration in his voice. Should she let him get closer, or would it be smarter to take a step back? Even with Do-hyun, she had always kept a certain distance and maintained a steady warmth. But just the sound of Lee Jae-heon's soft laugh was enough to shatter that balance. Suddenly, he asked if he should just leave, and Eun-gyo was surprised. Had he really been standing outside her house all this time? Jae-heon replied that if she didn't want him to come up, would she at least come down for a minute to give him a kiss? When she looked out the window, she saw Jae-heon. He was leaning against his car, staring up at her. He had been standing there for about an hour. Seeing his radiant smile, Eun-gyo felt her heart pounding wildly. She thought that even when she tried to keep her distance, he closed it without hesitation, and she liked that. What frightened her was how flustered she became at the sight of him. Her feelings were completely slipping out of control, and she answered that she would come down to him. A few minutes later, she swung the front door open and looked at Jae-heon as if she hadn't believed he would really be standing there. But deep down, she had hoped to see him. Jae-heon was a little surprised to see her. She looked shaken, even though just moments ago she had been laughing and joking so cheerfully on the phone. But then he gave her a warm smile, and at the sight of that smile, she was ready to surrender to him without resistance. She walked up to him and immediately found herself in his arms, feeling so good there. Jae-heon looked into her eyes, gently brushing his palm across her cheek. His fingertip lingered on the spot where faint traces of her recent tears still remained. His voice was low. He smiled and said he really liked how she looked without makeup. Then he leaned in and left a soft kiss on the barely visible red marks, silently soothing her emotional wounds. Eun-gyo turned her head toward him, their breaths mingling. She wanted to close the distance between them as quickly as possible. In the next moment, pulling him closer by the back of his head, she kissed him. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this story and what manhwa you'd like to see next. See you in the next installment.